such a pivotal time now, and it's like, just there's certain voices that need to be heard. There's certain directions that like the wisdom of our sages need to be incorporated within the world, and within the direction of wherever society's going. Like that's very important, in my opinion. And with the happenings with Israel and Iran, and with America being hand in hand with Israel, showing that support, it's like I just think it's a amazing opportunity, you know, to
Mm.
to, to really just be that light that Israel's supposed to be. Because I feel, I don't think people realize, like, and I might be wrong, you can correct me, but Bibi is Torah observant. You know what I mean? Like every, he's at the kotel. He's before he makes a move, he's praying to Hashem. It's like if you look at it, if you take a step back and you look at it, you have the government of Israel walking in accordance with the Torah. So it's an opportunity for light to, disseminate throughout the world. And of course, I'm always looking at it from, the possibility of African Americans getting more involved in Judaism. I do believe that we have a real spiritual claim to it. But obviously we've been lacking in the direction and, the opportunity to really immerse ourselves within it. But just to, have voices of our sages, directing this next phase of humanity is something I was thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something to think about. But the thing is, the only way it works is you hear me?
You started breaking up just now.
Is it better now?
Yeah, it was good before.
Oh, okay, cool. So the thing is, I would say that politics, no. Getting involved in politics, yes. Meaning that, like, like not being like a politician or anything like that, but if you were able to build enough of like, because basically being, say, the president, for example, of the United States is more about facilitating what a constituents wants, right? There's a constituents of people that are, like for example, Trump has his, they call it MAGA, right? Like that movement, right? Which is, a lot of prior movements and new people all kind of came together and to form this thing. But the bottom line is that is so he's that constituents that put him in office. He wants to, in essence, be able to serve their needs in the White House, right? So the thing is, the only reason why I would consider doing something like that is to basically design a campaign where the whole campaign is teaching, you know, like basically teaching Kabbalah in many ways. Meaning that, like, one of my main positions is that, in our society, we discount the soul, right? And we say soul is a religious entity, and and the soul, is part of this idea of separating church and state, and it's a religious idea, and we can't really equate it in science, and all this type of stuff. And so because of that, we create policies and laws and infrastructure that doesn't take in that account of the human being, right? And so because it doesn't take in that because it doesn't take in account that part of the human being, a lot of the things that most of the things that we create in society, create very unfulfilled people, right? And so um, the idea is to incorporate that frame of thinking and institutionalize it so that we can have a society that's like a complete, has a much more expanded frame of what it means to pursue happiness, and these types of things. So something like that will be cool. And then basically, every conversation is basically talking about the neshama and the soul and the transformation and us receiving light and us needing each other, us needing nature, and being able to just bring that discussion. So if that's what something Hashem wanted in a movement
If you broke out.
It wouldn't be to like something like
Rob, you broke out for like 30 seconds.
sorry, yeah, I just saw that actually. So, anyways, I don't know. It's something to think about, but okay, but it's just whatever. The point is just saying, like, it's a very interesting idea, and whatever platforms that could be utilized to teach people on a mass level these massive concepts, right? To be able to have that platform to do that, that would be the only purpose of like really, going after or inspiring for that or whatever. And so okay, so we're back in the rum call. We're in the Kalach Pirki Chochma. Okay, and we're in chapter 5. All right. So Sirach opening. Okay, so chapter 5 and 6, I guess they're connected, but we're only going to do chapter 5 today. And so the idea is Anayin HaSfirot. So it's like the Sfirot's the opening. So what is this whole concept? So again, so last class, for anybody who didn't catch it, which is very revolutionary, we were able to really reconfigure how Hashem creates reality and so many things, like the fact that Hashem's light is concealed in this world, the fact that we have challenges, the fact that we have lacks. We see all these things are frames of we say rachamim, forms of mercy that Hashem provides, because that system allows Hashem to disseminate His light in this reality and allow us to receive that light without necessarily being in a place of shame, a place of earning without receiving, right? So it's a love based system, right? It's a crazy way to look at it. So he says, "Hasfirod hem
Rob, can't see the
haor."
screen, Rob.
Oh wow, wow, wow! Thank you for that. Okay, so he says like this. Okay, so basically he's saying like this. He said the Sfirot. This is opening line. Spheroids were an invitation in that they are visible lights where the Ein Sof is not visible. Okay, so that's an interesting point, right? So he's making a differentiation based off of sight. Now, I can't see the spheroids and I can't see the Ein Sof, but here they're saying that the difference between the Ein Sof and the spheroids is that the Ein Sof is, I guess he's trying to say, concealed, and the spheroids are revealed. He says, Hasfirot hem haor sheni tanum. So he said the spheroids are lights that were permitted to be seen, which is not so in the case of the simple light of the Ein Sof, blessed be He. He says, okay, so he says the spheroids lights were permitted to be seen, which is not the simple light of the Ein Sof. So the Ein Sof, this is why Hashem designed reality. הנוסע של כל דרוshi החוכמה hazot. So he says through this, he says the subject of all the investigations of the Kabbalah is the Sfirot. He says, therefore, this is what must be explained first. So he said the preposition consists of two parts. One part is the spherotes are lights. This tells us that this tells us what the spherotes are. Part two, which is not so in the case of the simple light. This tells us in what way the spherotes are different in their nature from the Ein Sof. For in order to understand the Sphirot, it is necessary to understand in what way they were in They were an innovation introduced for the sake of creation. This is explained in part one. Initially, however, there were only two Ein Sof, blessed be He. If so, in order to know the Sfirot, it is necessary to know in what way they differ from their original state and from the Ein Sof. He says, Ha Sfirot, Ha. So he's saying, so, okay. So there's two parts. He said the Sfirots are lights, is one idea. And he said the second part, which is not the case for the simple light. So I guess he's referring to the simple light as the Ein Sof, and the spheroids as are different lights. He said, in order to understand the spheroids, it's necessary to understand that the way that they were innovated, um, introduced for the sake of creation. This is explained in part one. He says, initially, however, there was only the Ein Sof. So that was the beginning. In order to know that the sphere was necessary, it's necessary to know in what way they differ from the original sphere. So this is the difference. So he says the first part is Hasfirot hem haor. She says Hazeh ki hine. Hasfirot hem ma. So he says the spheroids are lights. It is through the spheroid which godliness unfolds or extends. Okay, so the godliness from the Ein Sof, like I guess, expresses itself through this idea of the spheroid. He says we cannot refer to the unfolding or extension of godliness as anything but the radiant light of the Haor. So he said we cannot refer to the unfolding of this extension anything as just referred to as light. So this aspect that extends from the Ein Sof is this idea called light. For the truth is that the godliness does not extend, since the concept of extension and change are not applicable to God. Therefore, however, we call the radiance that spreads from them the unfolding or radiance of goodness, and according we say that the spheroids are radiates of light. So he's saying the base premise to understand the spheroids is the understanding as it relates to the Ein Sof. The Ein Sof is this kind of like concealed reality that's like endless, right? Beyond our imagination in many ways, in all ways, right? But what extends this will, this ratzon that extends from this endless light, we refer to as the spheros. In the basis of the spheros is the fact that they are representing this, they're helping us understand this godliness that's emanating from the inside. Ve'amnam she'elokut lo no kala lekara otu. So he says indeed we cannot call goodness anything other than a radiant of light. In truth, no word, name, or term can adequately be applied to goodness, to godliness. But since it is impossible to speak without words, we must call them some name. However, we choose one that is somewhat less remote from godliness than others. Light in its finest and the most subtle of all physical phenomena, and according it is he says, and accordingly it is less remote from the godliness than other phenomena. If so, the term radiant of light is the nearest we can choose. So instead of calling this godliness, like this force that emanates from and it's interesting, you see Ramchal is building us into the language of the spirit. Like how do you get to understanding and referring to the spirit, right? So he's saying that we understand it through radiant light, right? And he says, even so, you must understand that we are not talking about a physical light. We apply the term radiant light only to give some name. So he says that we are permitted to. He says they are permitted to be seen. He's going off at this point. He says, for the difference between the spheroids and the Ein Sof, blessed be He, is that it was made possible for the spheroid to be seen, the Ein Sof. right? He says, in a sense of being spiritually apprehended. He says these two things. So he's saying like he says the fact that the Ein Sof is like basically like invisible, right? Allow the spherot to be visible, if that makes sense. He says this means two things. Firstly, it means that the spherots are capable of being seen. Through this does not imply that the spherot must necessarily be visible. For indeed, there are exalted spherot that are not visible, even in the highest realms. What is implied is that they are fit and able to be seen. Should it happen, the suspector is prevented from seeing them. This does not detract from their nature of being potential, I mean, potentially visible. However, the light of the Ein Sof cannot be seen because it is eccentric, it is its because of its eccentric essence, which is unseeable. Um, it's like you see like those things like a person's like invisible. Something happened, they become invisible. It's like, and they're walking around, and you can see their foot's like on the beach in a desert or dirt or whatever, right? Or mud. You can see their foot. So he's kind of like making that relationship through that invisible entity that is the driving force and an expression of it that can be seen. But what you're seeing is not, the Ein Sof. It's an expression of the Ein Sof, right? He says, horror Tibet. So he said, secondly, saying that the spheroids are permitted to be seen, we are not saying that they are eccentrically visible. The light of the spheroid is not a particular kind of light that is visible in its eccentric nature, as opposite to the light of the Ein Sof, blessed be He, which is not. What changed in the act of creation was that the spheroid became visible. It became possible for them to it became possible for them to be seen because the Ein Sof wanted it so. If the light of the sphere was a particular kind of light that was visible in its eccentric nature, we would have to say that the spheroids were not an innovation. For what exists in something as part of its eccentric nature is found throughout its essence. If the ability if the ability if the ability of the sphere to be seen were part of their eccentric nature, then as long as the nature of the sphere existed, it would have been visible. What we have, what we must say is that the light of the sphere cannot have been new, but rather the revelation of its light, the ability of the sphere to be seen in what was new. All right, let's try to understand that. Okay, so what we're pounding on right now is this idea of the visibility of the Sphirot and the concealment of the Ein Sof, right? And so what he says, so in essence, what he's saying, this is a key point. What changed in the act of creation was that the Sphirot became visible. It became possible for them to be seen because the Ein Sof wanted it so. So he says, if the light of the sphere was a particular kind of light that was visible in its eccentric nature, we would have to say that the spheroids were not an innovation. So he's saying because that the basis of the spheroids is light, we can't say like, oh, the spheroids is this thing that kind of like was created and attached to this creative process. But rather it's like the unfolding of this light that comes from the creator. Okay. Okay. And so we must say that the light of Israel cannot be new. It was real. Okay, so I think we're kind of clear on that point. Veze ki hasfirot kala. He says alakut alabakut ein she. Okay, so he says this is because the thrills are godliness. He says change from the state to state is simple, not applicable to godliness. If so, the light of the sphere is nothing. It's not something new. The inference is that the light of the sphere was there from before. If the visibility of this light were part of its eccentric nature, it would always have been visible. He says, in this case, what's new? He said, what is new was God willed and made it possible for the light of this world to be seen. He gave this permission at the precise moment. He wished not before the change was not the nature of godliness. He said the change was in it was in its being revealed to the recipients. So that's an interesting point. So it's like the idea of something that like always existed there, right? Something that always existed there in front of you, and but all of a sudden now you can see it, right? You know, they talk about this idea, like I don't know like how real it is, but they talk about like the Indian, the shaman. They said when the first pilgrims came to the ports of North America, what would be known as North America, they the Indians couldn't see the boats because they couldn't conceive of the a structure built in such a way, right? That is huge, like the big ships, right? This is what I heard. It may not even be true, but the idea still is there. So they said, like, so the shaman, the wise men of the Indian, what they noticed is that the water currents were changing, and there was something influencing the water, and then from there they started to recognize that something was approaching, and then over time they were able to see this structure that was known as a ship, right? So from there, it was revealed. So he's saying here, he said the spheroids is not like a new invention. It's not something separate than the Ein Sof. It's something that's a part of the Ein Sof that was inside of it, right? And when the Simsun, when that world was created and experienced, you could say that the unfolding of of this idea of the spheros extended from the Ein Sof. Ute vina vaze. So he says, from this you can understand why it's so appropriate to refer to the spherotes as a imminent light, right? He says, for on the level that the spiritual eye can see, light was imminent to our eyes. The light could be seen. This is not the case at first. And if permission were granted to the eye to see, we would be able to recognize that everything has a root, the Ein Sof, what cannot be seen. This is one light that exists through him on a level such as it can be seen. And this is the light of the sphere. If so, let us call it a light that emanates from the ain, from nothing, from what cannot be conceived. So he's in that idea of the light of the Ein Sof being this concealed light, and this concealed light being the basis of all creation. Right now, we're working on the spheros, right? But everything that exists is emanating this light from the Ein Sof. He says, so he says, which is not so the case of the simple light, the Ein Sof. He says the simple light is that which cannot be described, defined, or categorized in any way. It is impossible to say anything about his light. Since there's no word or name fit to apply to the Ein Sof, blessed be, we refer to him in the only way that we can, using the expression simple light. However, we qualify this by negating any limitation that appears to be implied in him on account of the term we have chosen. For in truth, no such limitation is extended. Thus, we say that the light of this Ein Sof cannot be seen. And this is the difference between the Ein Sof, blessed be He, and the Sphirot. Okay, so we're stopping here at 5. Stopping here at 5. So, what are some of your thoughts, reflections so far?
Um, and it reminds me, that last part reminds me of David Hamelech, where he says silence is the greatest praise to Hashem, because silence has no limitation. It's the closest like recognition to Hashem that we could, conceptualize. And this kind of goes to that the concept of like our ability to even speak. Um, Ralph went out. Yeah, Ralph, you good?
David Melech.
Ralph, you good? Yeah, went out.
Yeah. I was saying, hold on. Can you hear me now or no?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. So you're saying David Melech?
Yeah, I was saying David Hamelech, says silence is the greatest praise to Hashem. And like silence has no limitation. It has no form. So I think it's like the closest, recognition that we can get to Hashem. And it kind of goes into like our ability to speak is to even like to articulate is to get close to Hashem in a way that we can comprehend, in a way that we were like there's it's beyond our comprehension. Hashem. It's beyond like the Ein Sof. It's what I'm getting from that is the hidden light that was stored away. And he even goes to like Moshe Rabbeinu when he wanted to see, it says he wanted to see his face in a way, but he only could see his back. It's like there's levels of separation that we can't even approach Hashem. So he gives us these mechanisms. He gives us the Torah. He gives us the ability to speak on a simple level, to even be able to approach him. You know what I mean? To become like in form so we can start to dive into the mysteries of who Hashem is and what He is, the essence. Like we're dealing with the will. Like even the essence of Hashem is beyond our comprehension. So we have to, follow certain orders of steps to even conceptualize Hashem, to even get into the framework of understanding what this is. And that's kind of what I'm getting with the Sephiroth. Like it wasn't something that the innovation of the shine is always been there, but for us to be able to see it, it's like the innovation. I think I was understanding that correctly. So it seems like the Ram call is really just trying to lay out the order of how we even approach reality.
Yeah. No, you're 100% right. And it's just it's a very big idea, right? Because the beauty in this particular safer is the building blocks, right? It's like that there's building blocks that um there's building blocks that like he's putting us through, right? And we're seeing that. So right now we gave us a clear understanding of the right, like now we're understanding, now that he established the sovereignty of God, the influence of God, all these different types of things. Once those things were established, then you're able to move into another frame, which is how this light is disseminated, how the function. So that's where we're at exactly at this point is dealing with that aspect, right? Which is how the creator reveals himself in this reality. And so now we're seeing that we learned about this concept of the Ein Sof, and then now we're seeing that there's this aspect that comes from the Ein Sof, right? That we refer to as spherotes, and the spherotes are kind of like the extending of this will from this endless source, right? And so this ability for us to be able to have a structure to it is what he means by visible, right? Like it's visible that we could apply a structure to it, that we could say a keter, a chochma, a bina. We could put a structure and to see the dissemination. So that's what he means by visible, right? Because we can't. Obviously, I can't go outside and see the 10 spheros. You know what I'm saying? I mean, maybe you could. I mean, I can't, right? But most people can't. But so he's saying it from this standpoint of of that, right? Of being able to put into a system. So now that God influence is extending from this endless reality, now we could kind of like start to put it into a structure. And then I'm assuming the next part is when he starts to break down how the spheroids could be into different levels and the measuring stick and all these types of things, which I mean, you know, he's building it out for us. I don't think you could get more clear than this. You know what I mean? In terms of, you know, building out the structure. I mean, this is like, I mean, like I said, like I was telling somebody this other day, but it's like, this is like basically like I see where Rob Ashlak got his concept of his introduction of Kabbalah. He's basically doing his, I use the term rendition of the Ramchal. It's like he's going off of the Sefer, the way he starts with the questions, the way he builds into reality. And I'm saying, into a degree, I was very impressed by Rav Ashlag, you know, in the introduction to Kabbalah. But I'm reading this and I'm like, well, in a way, Ramchal is speaking at maybe even more of a grassroots level, right? Because like even when you learn Rav Ashlag, it's like there's certain things you gotta have to take into account. You know, like you have to have certain like baseline of learning. But this, the way he's teaching it, I mean, you could teach a child. You know what I'm saying? Like the way he's the structure he's building, you could literally teach anybody, even if they don't even have a real background. And I'm saying, I Rav, so this is very high level. Is
Yeah, Rob, you starting to go out.
that he like brought it down. Chat. Okay.
Now you start breaking up like the last 15 seconds.
Can you hear me now or no?
I can hear you now.
No. All right, let's do this because I say that there's a special blessing. There's a special blessing that we when we ask Hashem, please allow me to remember the Torah that you blessed me to learn, right? Because it's the remembering of that Torah that allows us to utilize it, you know, in different situations. So we want to be able to retain that. But I don't know, bro. We're in it. You know what I mean? We're in it. There's a lot going on. I'm really glad we had this class. And we just got to just stay aware of that. Like, you know, bro, it's the time, like, telling you, bro, you understand, like, there's like so many things, you know, that are going on. It's like, it's the time just like wants to like create situations